Hi, I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EA Worldview on Syria and Iraq. So who created the Islamic State? Last weekend, a reporter named Patrick Coburn in The Independent said that he knew who created the Islamic State, that group which has been wreaking havoc across Syria and which has been leading the insurgency in Iraq against the al-Malaki government. Coburn said it's Saudi Arabia. His proof? A statement in 2001 by a man named Prince Bandar, a leading figure in Saudi politics, who said that the Sunnis were now going to wage a war against Shia Muslims, challenging millions of them across the Middle East and beyond. Wow, that's pretty impressive, given that the Islamic State, or its forerunner, al-Qaeda in Iraq, didn't even exist until 2004, during the American occupation of Iraq. But somehow, according to Coburn's story, this one statement from a figure who at one time was head of Saudi intelligence proves this was a masterful plot from Riyadh to wipe out every Shia Muslim in the world. But Coburn's not the only person who has a theory about who created the Islamic State. Every day, you can go to Iranian newspapers. They know that it was actually created not by Saudi Arabia, or not just by Saudi Arabia, but also by the United States and Israel. That's right, even though the United States was actually fighting al-Qaeda in Iraq, because that group was killing American soldiers, they helped create the group. Why did they help create the group? Because this was part of a devious American plot to use al-Qaeda in Iraq to establish a position to challenge Iran. Well, how about a third theory? Here's one which comes out by certain American commentators writing for well-known outlets like Foreign Policy magazine. The Islamic State was not created by the U.S. to act against Iran. It was created by Iran to act against the United States. Using the comments of a couple of former U.S. intelligence officials, they say this is part of a devious plot led by an influential Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, who created this group to kill American soldiers and then eventually to take over Iraq, making it an Iranian outpost. Even though you might notice that the Islamic State is Sunni Muslim and the Iranians are Shia Muslim. You know the guys that the Islamic State were supposedly going to wipe out? Yeah, I know. I'm as confused as you are right now. So how about a bit of clarity? Who created the Islamic State? The Islamic State created itself. Recent research, featured for example by Hannah Allam of McClatchy News Service, by the RAND Corporation, gives you document after document about how al-Qaeda in Iraq developed as effectively a resistance to the American occupation, began to build up its own sources of finance, create its own units, communications, propaganda outlets, began to bring in weapons, improvised bombs, all as part of an initial local effort, but one which could expand beyond Iraq's borders. That's why the Islamic State was created. Eventually in 2013, it would move across the Iraqi border into Syria, nominally to fight the Assad regime, but then to fight other insurgents. And then even later, i.e. earlier this year, it would lead the offensive which took key Iraqi cities such as Mosul and Tikrit and advanced on Baghdad. So if the Islamic State effectively is self-created, if it finances itself, brings in its own resources, is not dependent upon the Saudis, the Iranians, the Americans, the Israelis, aliens from outer space, why do we get these theories? Well, two reasons. First, it's really, really difficult to acknowledge that the Islamic State creates itself because that makes it a much tougher problem to solve. See, if you do that, you actually have to admit that Iraqi politics, Iraqi economics, the Syrian conflict are so messed up, so deadly, that this group is going to operate for years to come unless somehow you find a way out of those crises. Unless you find a way to deal with the Assad regime, unless you find a way to deal with the problems in Baghdad, the Islamic State will exist and probably flourish. But since it's not easy to offer a solution, then the second explanation. It's so much easier to blame someone else. Look, if you're part of, let's call it the anti-imperialist writers out there, the ones who always look to the United States or Israel being the cause of every conflict in the world, just point at them. If you don't like Saudi Arabia, because quite frankly, it's not the most open, liberated regime in the world, hey, blame them. If you're the Iranians, of course, the easy thing to say is it's got to be the great Satan, the little Satan, other Satan's the Jewish Satan who's behind it. Or alternatively, if you're a U.S. commentator and you hate Tehran, just blame them. In other words, the Islamic State serves a function to fight other political battles, even as it wins its own, even as it builds up strength. The Islamic State is propped up because others are using it as a political tool, and not to bring any type of basically solution for Iraq and Syria, but just to cause more problems through misguided, exaggerated, and distorted explanations. I'm Scott Lucas, and this has been today's EA Worldview on Iraq and Syria.